First off, congratulations on doing your first keyframes and adjustment layers. Those are going to be so helpful in your editing journey. And I think your zoom is looking pretty great. Apart from, wait, the action's moving to a different part of the screen and the zoom's not following. If only we could keep the camera glued onto what's important. And of course you can do that. And in this section, I'm going to teach you how tracking works in Premiere Pro. This is another transferable skill, but really right now we're going to be focusing on motion tracking. Before we start motion tracking after our zoom, we're going to want to add some guidelines so that we have a reference point to track against. Almost like a crosshair in a game or aiming down a sniper scope for pinpoint accuracy. To do this, we have to add two widgets to this bar along the bottom of the playback window. The first widget is this one here. This shows a safety margin. Drag and drop that to below the playback window, like so. We're also going to want to do that with the Show Guides widget, which will, as you may have guessed, show us the guides. This can also be toggled on and off once dropped in, and when they're on, they should have this blue highlight. As you can see, not a whole lot has changed in the playback window just yet, except that you can see the safety margins. And these are often useful if you want to see what area of a video would appear if you cropped into the video for a different social media, for example. But that's not what we're going to be doing right now. First, we're going to customize these lines and make some guides.
Now go here and press Show Guides, which makes us ready to add some lines.
To do this, head up and click View, and then select Add Guide. A small pop-up window will give you some options like changing the color and position.
I'm keeping mine on the default green, and then I'm going to add a horizontal line that's midway through the window. Because we're working at 3840 by 2160 pixels, the halfway point horizontally is 1080 pixels, which is half of 2160. So type in 1080. Make sure that we're on horizontal and click OK. To add the vertical line, go through the same process, but change the line to vertical and change the position to 1920, as that's half of 3840, and then hit OK.
If you've done everything right, these lines should line up with your safety margins. And if that's the case, then well done. You've nailed it. Switch off the safety margin and your guides are in place. Of course, you don't need the safety margin at all if you're confident in what you're doing, but this just demonstrates how to set up your own guides and displays what safety margins do. With your guides in place, you may also notice that your footage is wonky. You can straighten out the footage by changing the rotation value in the Effect Controls panel. You can even keyframe rotation so that your video spins. Whoa, don't do that yet. No point. Let's stick with motion tracking after our zoom. You're going to want to pick out something to zoom in on and track. For instance, you may want to follow someone's face around and make the zoom keep centered on their face. As we zoomed into this point in the last section of the course, the zoom's already in place, though we want to choose a specific point to follow. Let's change the position we're zooming into by changing the positional values of the camera to zoom into the person's nose. Right-click your keyframe and hit Ease In again. This will replace the old keyframe with the new one, making sure there are no strange new motions. It's worth noting that when playing with older keyframes, Adobe can be prone to getting confused and having new strange motions, and this just helps avoid that. We're also going to want to lose any shutter angle changes that we've added to the zoom to make it blurry. Remember, we turned it up to 180 before to get that nice smooth feel to it. And tracking requires moving the virtual camera around frame by frame. And when that happens, the shutter speed comes into play and will make our tracking look really blurry. So we're going to need that to be 0 again. To do this, make a new keyframe on the shutter angle 3 frames before the end of the zoom, using the directional keys to be accurate. Then make another keyframe at the end of the zoom. Change the value of the shutter angle to 0 on the second keyframe. This will make the shutter angle 0 again for the rest of the adjustment layer. We're now going to want to track that person's face so that we're keeping them on screen. Unfortunately, you're going to have to manually do this, which takes time and can be a bit tedious, but it is very worth it. This is all going to be done using the position variable keyframes. So let's make a new keyframe, 1 frame in front of our last keyframe that has the ease in on it. Premiere will automatically make this a Bezier keyframe like the last one, but as we don't want the ease in or ease out function on this, we're going to have to turn this back into a linear keyframe. which is that classic diamond shape that we saw a lot of earlier.
Now let's move on a few frames and we can see that the face has moved and is no longer central to our guides.
We want to change the positional values so that our crosshair is on the exact same point that we zoomed into. In this example, it's the person's nose.
Let's move on another few frames and do the exact same thing and keep going and going and going, making sure the nose stays central.
When you change the positional values, Premiere is going to make a new keyframe for you. Let's move on another frame and do the exact same thing. And then another frame on, same process. Here's me doing this at normal speed for a couple of frames just to show you how easy it is, even though it is a bit time consuming. And here's me speeding up the process to show you the final results. This is what it should look like. I'm zooming 200% into my face. A super steady and locked off shot of the thing that you wanted to track. If you're not fussed about this being a perfect hold on what you're tracking, you can put keyframes in after every 2 or 3 frames instead of every single frame, which can save you some time. However, this can tend to look a bit strange, and it really is a case-by-case scenario, depending on what you're trying to accomplish and also the footage. Now, another thing you may want to do is add a smooth zoom out. This is basically the same process as zooming in, but in reverse. Go to the part you want to zoom out of and then create 2 new keyframes, one on the position and one on the scale.
Then move forward about 15 frames, depending on your preference for how quick you want the zoom, and add another 2 keyframes.
Hit these 2 reset buttons and that will reset the keyframes to their original starting positions. Now don't forget to right-click and ease out on the first set of keyframes, then right-click and ease in on the second pair of keyframes. We also want that blurry shutter angle effect to come back into our zoom. So create 2 new keyframes, one that's 3 frames before the zoom out and another that's exactly on the zoom out. Turn the second keyframe's shutter angle back up to 180 or 360, whatever you had it as before. And now the shutter angle is at the same value as for the last zoom. We're essentially using these keyframes to turn the blur back on, and you can use another set of keyframes to turn the motion blur back off. It's simple, and now you have a nice zoom out that's putting all of your new keyframe skills to good use. And that is easy motion tracking.